The night over Blackwater City had never been this silent. Beneath a sky plastered with wanted notices, a single piece of news shook the entire city. The only son of sect master Qing Xuan had been murdered in the central tavern. The killer was said to be a young man not yet 20, accompanied by a battle puppet in martial venerable armor. The whole city was sealed. The gates were shut tight. Martial artists everywhere were being searched and interrogated. At that very moment before the gates of the city lord's mansion, where the night exchange banquet gathering the realm's top powerhouses was about to begin, a gray-robed youth stepped forward at an unhurried pace. Behind him stood a tall figure clad in black armor, face hidden behind a mask, its chilling aura freezing the very air around it. Name. The youth lowered his head respectfully. Disciple Trin Mok, attending the banquet under my master Han Quan. No one knew that the hand he now kept loosely clenched was the very hand that had crushed the throat of the man the entire city was hunting. And tonight, surrounded by the vortex of power, he would walk straight into the eye of the storm. The gates of the city lord's mansion closed behind Trin Mok. Outside, the lockdown tightened its grip on every street. Inside, the night exchange banquet flickered to life beneath cold blue spirit flame lanterns, a place only those deemed worthy were allowed to enter. Trin Mok walked with his head lowered behind Han Quan, yet his mind was anything but calm. He hadn't come to play the games of power. He came for the water spirit origin essence, the only thing capable of awakening the ancient spirit body slumbering within his spatial artifact. If he failed to secure that source of energy within 3 days, the spirit would dissipate, and he would lose the only trump card strong enough to contend with a martial emperor. The problem was simple: an origin essence of that level was rarer than legend itself, and the only place with any information about it was tonight's trading floor. But every gaze in the grand hall was a sharpened blade. One minor slip and his true identity would be exposed. He stood between two choices: seize his chance to survive, or die under the name of a wanted criminal. The grand hall gradually filled. More than 20 powerhouses sat in a wide arc, their auras intertwining until the air itself felt heavy as lead. Trin Mok kept his head lowered, yet not a single fluctuation of spiritual energy in the room escaped his senses. Senior Han Quan. Is this your first visit to Blackwater? A young man in blue robes asked with a probing smile. Before Trin Mok could respond, the black-armored figure tilted its head slightly. An invisible wave of pressure spread outward, just enough to warn, not enough to provoke. The hall fell silent for a brief moment. Two envoys from Azure Radiance Isle exchanged glances, strange light flickering within their pupils. They attempted to peer through the black armor, but a surge of spiritual force erupted like an iron wall, instantly blocking all attempts at scrutiny. Our apologies, one of them said quietly, his arrogance noticeably diminished. Trin Mok knew the game had begun. If he wanted to survive, he would need to construct an identity so formidable that no one would dare test it again. Tonight was not merely a trade. It was his first life-and-death performance at the very heart of power. After the failed attempt at probing, the atmosphere in the grand hall shifted noticeably. No one dared treat Han Quan as an unknown outsider anymore. Seizing the moment, the city lord of Blackwater rose to his feet and presented an item as a test, a dark wooden fragment, whose spiritual aura was so faint it was nearly negligible. Can anyone identify its origin? The hall fell silent. A few tried to examine it, but each ultimately shook their heads. The black-armored figure suddenly spoke in a low, steady voice. Nourishing soul heartwood. The remaining core of a divine tree that has already withered. Pure. But the quantity is too small. The entire hall trembled. Doubt in their eyes turned to astonishment. The city lord gave a wry laugh and admitted the answer was correct. A wager of spirit stones changed hands. Without hesitation, Han Quan exchanged the frame of an ancient warship for the wooden fragment. The moment the nourishing soulwood was stored within his spatial artifact, the ancient spirit inside Trin Mok's private domain quivered, its aura rising by another layer. That was the turning point. From a suspected outsider, he became the one holding the initiative. And for the first time that night, the major powers began calculating him as an equal opponent. The credibility he had just established had barely taken root when the doors of the grand hall burst open. A guard dropped to his knees against the cold stone floor. Reporting to the city lord, the Qingxuan sect has sealed off all of Blackwater City. Martial Emperor Qingxuan is on his way. The air froze. Madame Si Yun slowly rose, her gaze sweeping across the hall. We have identified the killer as a young man accompanied by a martial venerable level battle puppet. Each word struck like a hammer. One by one, eyes instinctively settled on Han Quan and Trin Mok. No longer curious, now calculating. If they could hand over the culprit, they would earn the favor of a peak-tier sect. At that very moment, the two envoys from Azure Radiance Isle produced 2,000 frost spirit pearls, openly seeking to trade for battle armor schematics as war loomed across the sea. Trintmach needed those pearls to complete his plan, but now every move he made could become evidence against him. He understood this clearly. If the martial emperor entered the city before he escaped, this night of trade would turn into an execution ground. News of the approaching martial emperor hung overhead like a blade poised to fall. The Grand Hall was no longer a place of trade, it had become a silent battlefield of schemes and calculations. Trintmach knew he was running out of time. If he wanted to break free from this disadvantage, he had to raise the stakes so high that no one would dare overturn the table lightly. The battle armor of Han Quan lifted a hand. A massive metal pillar crashed down into the center of the hall with a thunderous boom. Arctic zenith iron, a peak 9th grade metal. Its frigid aura spread outward, frost instantly, crystallizing across the stone floor. The entire hall held its breath. Yet at that very moment, a wave of overwhelming pressure swept across Blackwater City from afar. No one needed to say it aloud, the martial emperor had reached the city's edge. If he were detained for identity verification, every layer of disguise would become meaningless. Even with Arctic zenith iron in hand, he stood no chance against an existence of that level. The gazes within the hall began to waver. No one stood on his side. No one needed to. For the first time since stepping into the city lord's mansion, Trintmach felt it clearly. The game had slipped beyond his control. As the pressure tightened around him, Trintmach suddenly withdrew the Arctic zenith iron. The gesture made many assume he had accepted defeat, but in the next instant he produced a small shard of metal, no larger than a fingertip, its light restrained intricate patterns forming naturally across its surface. The moment Madame Sheyun saw it, her expression changed. Heaven Star imperfect gold. Unlike the ostentatious metal pillar from before this, was a material capable of shaking any major merchant guild to its core. Trintmach ignored the others. His gaze rested solely on Sheyun. I want all the frost spirit pearls. And a route out of the city immediately. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. To merchants, profit always outweighed sect loyalties. Ziyun smiled. Deal. The lesson of that night carved itself deep. True power does not lie in who is stronger, but in who possesses what others cannot afford to refuse. The martial emperor was entering the city, but now Trintmach had secured his path of escape. Madame Sheyun's warship departed the city lord's mansion at the very peak of the lockdown. A spirit formation tore open a narrow gap in the sky, which trembled under the descending pressure of a martial emperor. The instant the vessel shot upward, a deep explosion echoed across Blackwater City. On the horizon, a figure in flowing azure robes stood suspended in midair, his gaze cold as an abyss. The martial emperor had arrived. But the warship had already slipped beyond the range of his divine sense. Trintmach stood on the deck, his hand tightening around the storage pouch filled with frost spirit pearls. Within his spatial artifact, the ancient spirit was absorbing the energy, its aura gradually stabilizing. Qi Long looked at him, half curious, half wary. What is it you truly want? Trintmach gazed at the city shrinking into the distance behind them. I'm only preparing for an era that is about to collapse. Rumors spread before the night was over. The divine tree had completely withered. An ancient vessel known as the Heaven's Revelation Ark seemed to have found its master. The wind had shifted, and the real game had only just begun.